Let's attempt to make sense of all of this for you, bringing SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena, who joins us here in our studios. Great to see you as always, Ms. Sophie. Thanks for popping by. It feels like it's a changing world order right before our eyes. But let's take a few steps back. For people who aren't able to connect the dots, help us understand how developments in the EU Parliament have now resulted with France, for example, calling for a snap election.
Well, clearly, Emmanuel Macron was fully aware that he needs a mandate from the legislature in France in terms of where to from here. Because as you heard in that report, you need a relationship to ensure that the EU is effective. In other words, parties will have to work together in a form of coalition or unity talks to ensure that whatever is before the EU Parliament is able to see the light of the day. You know that has to do with issues that are related to immigration, migration. Many people in Europe, in different countries, are not happy about the handling of this problem in that region. The other issue, you saw many farmers taking to the streets, particularly in countries such as Belgium, France, and therefore that sector very unhappy. The other issue is the efforts in terms of these countries, their involvement as members of NATO in assisting Ukraine, and therefore there are people in those countries who are not happy about the handling of the war in Ukraine. The other important issue, clearly, it's about bread and butter issues. You know, the cost of living very high, the issue of energy supply, the issue of fuel very expensive, and therefore this is part of the challenges this region is facing at the moment, and therefore the people of Europe have spoken.
Yeah, and in fact, as they speak, people are now talking about the rise of the right in some respects, and I suppose this is the result of that.
You know that normally the right-wing parties, they thrive on populism. And therefore, you can see that because they were very firm on issues that are related to migration and immigration, it is for that reason they were gaining traction in many countries because many people in those countries are aggrieved in terms of number of boats that you see in Spain crossing the Mediterranean Sea and a lot of people coming from different parts of the world, not only from Africa, but also from Asia and also from Middle East moving to Europe. And therefore, there was discomfort in terms of people in Europe. The other issue is the issue of the war in Ukraine. You know that many far-right parties are not happy in terms of money spent in supporting Ukraine, and therefore that was bound to happen. And the other issue is you cannot leave Russia out of this. I mean, people are looking at Russia. It was only on Friday where the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, was talking about how Europe has changed in terms of culture, the look and the interest. But when you look at the Eastern Europe, is the only area of that whole region that is still sticking to the tradition of Europe, the look, the feel, the language, and protecting the culture. And therefore, you can see that it is that kind of challenges that has led to people in Europe deciding to give some right-wing parties more votes, even though they are not dominating the elections, but they were able to get more votes. And that is why Emmanuel Macron took a decision to call fresh elections, and you have in Belgium the Prime Minister resigning.
I was about to ask you about exactly that, right? So this coincides with the Prime Minister of Belgium resigning. It's raising questions about the stability in the G7, for example, and what that means ultimately for the world.
Yes, we know that the G7 meeting is supposed to start this coming weekend. You can imagine what the discussions are going to be about behind the scenes. In public, they are going to put that spirited, united force, but behind the scenes, bilaterals will revolve around the changing world and how do you ensure that as this is happening, you don't find a situation where the right-wing parties are surging. But unfortunately, this is what's happening. We've been monitoring this for the last five years. It started 5 years ago, and clearly that whole phenomena is becoming more popular. And when you look at the elections in the United States of America, when you look at Donald Trump and Joe Biden, you can see that even the biggest economy in the world, the United States of America, is also facing a similar problem. And I think the people who are watching and just observing is Russia and China.
Absolutely. I mean, it happened in the United States. It happened in Brazil. We saw the rise of the right. It happened, I think, the Philippines as well. They saw a president with those kind of sentiments. But I mean, also there's been developments in the Middle East, right? We have heard all kinds of, commentary around Benjamin Netanyahu's lack of a plan post the war, so much so that Benny Gantz has now resigned because of that very issue. How do you reckon all of that is going to land?
Well, clearly we know that the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is traveling to the Middle East, Tel Aviv, to be precise, to meet the Prime Minister of Israel, because this situation has presented an opportunity to push Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire, because as you can see, people are taking to the streets in Tel Aviv every evening, thousands and thousands of people calling on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to step out of the office. And therefore, this is a moment to push for ceasefire. We don't know what's going to happen. And those resignations are actually assisting those who are pushing for a ceasefire. On the other hand, you're waiting to hear how Hamas will respond to the proposals on the table. We know that the President of the United States of America has kind of given Benjamin Netanyahu a program in terms of how this can be achieved. Whether it will be acceptable, we don't know. But as we speak right now, Benjamin Netanyahu is facing huge challenges within his country, and we are waiting to see the arrival of Antony Blinken in Tel Aviv and what will be the message and whether we are likely going to see a ceasefire. On the other hand, the U.S. has presented a resolution in the Security Council of the United Nations. Today we'll see what does that resolution entail, and it will be debated by member states within the Security Council with the vote. We don't know whether your Russia, your China will support or they are going to abstain or veto the resolution.
Sure. It feels like there's a tenuous stability here at home. Things are quite tense in the Middle East. It's Europe this side, the G7. You've covered international affairs for years, and I wonder if you can recall a moment like this in history where it just feels like so much, frankly, is in the air and very few people know what the answer is to ensure that whatever emerges on the other side is at the very least sustainable and a continuation of the kind of stability we've seen.
For many years, there was a search of the left parties. There was hope that the world will change for the better, particularly for the poor and the downtrodden around the world. But unfortunately, the world is changing, moving to the right. You can see what happened last night in Europe, and therefore it becomes a real problem. It is the most challenging times, and at a time where you have two huge conflicts, one in the Middle East and one in Ukraine. And therefore, you can see that it looks like the world is drifting apart, as the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres predicted 3 years ago. And secondly, you can see that there is no global synergy in terms of the leadership of the world. We have the weakest leadership currently globally. They can't manage to handle the current challenges. You look at South Africa, we have a similar situation where, as we speak now, we don't know what's going to happen. And therefore, you can see just hard lines from both sides or all sides. And therefore, it's quite confusing. And at the end of the day, it's ordinary people of the world who are going to suffer. The same with South Africa. It is ordinary people in South Africa who will be suffering if there's no conclusion of way forward in terms of what's happening in the country and also on the region. I mean, if South Africa is at this crossroad, it means challenges for southern region, because South Africa is the largest economy in the SADC region, on the continent as well. And you have lots of elections coming on the continent. Ghana, Namibia, Botswana, Mozambique. We don't know what's going to happen there. And therefore, Africa is not spared either.
Yeah, absolutely. What a time. Hopefully the next time we speak, we'll have a few more answers than the questions that are lingering. But for now, thanks very much indeed for helping us make sense of it all as much as we can.